for this session. We have apologies from Huntington Ramenya, who had an emergency. But we're very privileged to have with us Alex Chamwada, who's a household name to many of us. And he will be speaking to us about setting up and running a farm. And I think this, rides a lot on the discussion that we had yesterday afternoon around, is there life after the newsroom? And of course, disrupting the traditional way of media business, and of course sharing his experiences with having to run Chams Media. Also joining this panel is John Allen Namu, who's a founder, or is it co-founder, he'll tell us, of Africa Uncensored. Again, left the newsroom, so essentially disrupting the traditional way in which a media business or a newsroom is set to set up Africa Uncensored. And he will be speaking to us about editorial interference versus digital media. Do journalism standards operate on digital spaces as well? And then we are also joined in this panel by Pamela Sitoni. And Pamela is to speak to us about, in light of the changes that are currently happening in the media space, how do you manage, how do you lead a disrupted newsroom that, is pegged by many other concerns, a demoralized staff? So with that, I will not come up again. The panelists know the order. We'll save the questions to the end, and I will not be as gracious as Kwamchetsi was yesterday to come and tell you what I am hearing is. So please hear and take notes in the interest of time, because we have another panel to go over this afternoon. And then we'll come back and just take questions and comments. So karibu sana, Bwana Leo Baruet. So the camera guys are asking that each of the speakers comes down here to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. 10 minutes, sure. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So, first of all, good afternoon. Yeah, I also want to recognize my director, Professor Obonyo is somewhere. Oh yeah, yeah, Professor Obonyo, I understand he's a member of KEG also, and is also our director in Communication Authority. So apologies from our Director General. He couldn't make it. I really wanted to be here. So I'll just read his remarks. I'll go direct to his remarks. Mr. Churchill Otieno, Chairman, Kenya Editors Guild, Council members, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it was good morning, but I think now it's good afternoon. So we are privileged to be part of this occasion. We are honored. This convention brings together journalists, editors, and other key stakeholders in the media industry. We believe this also provides a space for stakeholders to reflect on issues of media freedom and also prospects for the media in a volatile environment. Noting this particular session actually is about disrupting the newsroom. So we want to acknowledge Kenya Editors Guild for their role in defending and promoting media freedom and editorial independence, quality and ethical journalism, and also a forum for sharing ideas and experiences. So I've been requested to speak on the thematic area of emerging landscape for digital and broadcast media, which recognizes the dynamism of the media and the need to leverage on the opportunities and challenges for a sustainable sector. So ladies and gentlemen, as a regulator for the broadcasting industry, we are charged with fostering the development of diverse broadcasting services in providing consumers with choice of content and platforms. Over the last few years, we have really witnessed a lot of technological developments, and we are happy, particularly for the transition from analog to digital broadcasting, where we have expanded opportunities and for other players to join the industry. We add 14 TV stations. Now we are talking of about 150 channels that are on air, providing content to a variety of audiences. There have been challenges, of course, in this journey, and one of the issues is there's been discussions on the quality of content and also sustainability of the stations that have come up. We know that what we know is that the shift has provided citizens opportunities for diversity and even promoting talent, avenues for musicians, avenues for actors, content creators. So let's say another significant development is that in terms of internet access, we've made a lot of strides. As at September 2022, we had actually 48.3 million internet penetration, and up to 60% of broadband penetration. And we're also talking about, even when it comes to handsets, we are now talking of 54.3% of smartphone access, penetration rather. So what we are saying, this also creates another opportunity for voice on demand and internet-enabled services that complement the traditional TV. We're also saying there's also development in the advertisement area. There's a report by BWC 2022-2026 Outlook, which is saying the internet advertising revenue is projected that by 2026, actually they'll be at par with the TV advertisement. So what we are saying is, ladies and gentlemen, with all this, what does the future look like? We are saying the future is bright. From our end, we are seeing what we can say is there are more platforms, because really our role is to open the space, and we are creating a lot of platforms. At the moment, we are trying to also look at the area of sound broadcasting, and we have a consultation going on digital sound broadcasting, which will be similar to TV, only that it will be an add-on to FM. It's not replacing FM, it will be a complementary. And we welcome you also to contribute, because it's actually the stakeholder consultation is going on. The paper is in our website, so we welcome inputs from the media on this front. And then we're also saying that OTT, 5G are also other areas, and in this end, we're also trying to do a study on regulation of OTTs, so that we see what role we can play. So with that, the authority will continue to monitor the landscape and introduce interventions that may be necessary. Of course, we challenge the media to confront these challenges, because we believe there are opportunities also for the traditional media as we open the digital space. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was going to make a presentation of about 17 pages on PowerPoint, but I realized that it's 4 p.m. on a sunny afternoon in Diani, and you've just eaten lunch, like just, right? We try, you guys? Okay. So page number 1 is the introduction, how I was born, and my journey to journalism. Anyway, so I have a very specific brief to talk about editorial standards in digital newsrooms, right? But I want us to, within the course of this presentation, to just take a look at something fairly interesting that David D has just tweeted. I won't take offense if you look at your phones during this presentation, because it'll add context to what I'm about to say. So the short answer is yes. A digital newsroom is a newsroom nonetheless. There are editorial standards that we must adhere to, laid out in, for instance, with my example at Africa Uncensored, laid out by the Media Council of Kenya. We have our code of ethics. We have our various laws that we abide by. I think what the challenge is, and perhaps this is why the question was posed to me, is do you have editorial standards in a day and age when news in all its forms and permutations doesn't come only from the newsroom, right? So we have so many interlocutors. We have, generally speaking, any member of the public can be a person who generates news today, and their views and the credibility of that content will be just as seriously taken or highly rated if it came from the Nation Media Group, or if it came from from Edgar Obare's BNN networks, right? The point really is, what is the role of the journalist in a day and age where information is so overwhelming and sometimes misleading? The role is what it has always been. It has been the person who sieves, the person who curates, the person who distills, or the industry that distills that information for further delivery to the public. What has changed, in my view, is the nature of the conversation between the newsroom and the public. And this is where that tension lies today. We can say that we have editorial standards, that we adhere to certain things, that we move slowly, but the response from the public will be, no, move faster, or I'll get it from somewhere else. And when you move faster and you make a mistake, now look at you, Getheri Media. You're moving too fast. I think that's where the tension lies. Overarching this is, can you keep editorial standards in a business model that is consistently under threat? And that's why I'd asked you to look at David Nd's tweet. He's essentially talking about the point at which digital advertising spends surpassed legacy media spends. And I think that happened for the first time last year in Kenya, right? Across all of our media. Yeah. And the point about the correlation between money and editorial standards is really very intense. If we do not have the money as newsrooms be able to operate, how can we keep, how can we still hold the line in terms of the editorial standards? Editorial standards are not just things that you have on paper, but they're things that you practice. To practice them, you require people who've been in the industry, who've seen things and the various ways in which news can change, and can advise younger people. It is a community of practice. Community of practice is funded by a business model. What is the business model that supports editorial independence, editorial standards and quality in this day and age? Something that I leave to you. The final thing that I will say, and perhaps we can have a further discussion about it, is that I don't think as yet that anybody has really managed, and this is old legacy media as well as new emergent and alternative media. I don't think anybody has managed that sweet spot between high editorial standards in terms of content and high value in terms of the amount of revenues that are being brought in to support your teams. That is a question that we must all start to think about collaboratively. And it's an urgent question specifically for organizations like the Editors Guild. This is why you exist, because you're the people who are really in the cauldron, who can come together using those different experiences that you have in your newsrooms to talk about what irks, or what really is the problem with the kinds of standards that you'd want to uphold in your disparate newsrooms, and how you can go about doing that together while ensuring mutual survival. We're at a point in our career, not in our careers, in our professions and in our business, that in my belief, and this might be a bit sensational, my belief is that in the next 3 years, if we don't do anything, and in terms of thinking collaboratively about these standards and about the model, then at least one of the big three legacy media houses will perish in these next 3 years in some way, shape, or form. We will not see, and I'm being honest here, right? You're not going to see this legacy media in the same way that we envisaged it. It'll be a completely different animal, and it'll likely, and that has already begun. See, we know what's been happening over the past few days, right? This is also happening globally. This is the opportunity, I'd say, that we have to start to think collaboratively about the nexus between editorial standards in a digital age, how you can use those editorial standards and values to drive business to your organization and to be able to remain relevant. Relevance means value in a marketplace. Are your ideas valuable? Are they valuable from the point of view of your editorial standards? I'll leave it there, and maybe we can have some discussions after that. Asanteni.
Thanks. John Allen, before you come up, in response to your last question, could you please respond to your own last question, drawing from your own experiences at Africa Uncensored? Yeah.
Okay. The short answer is no. I don't think that, broadly speaking, the local media scene is very akin to collaboration, thinking collectively, perhaps with the one shining exception of the presidential debates. I think that there are far more opportunities to think collaboratively about problems like platforms. And this is a big issue, Safaricom, let me give you an example from a different industry so that, when I say what I'm going to say, it doesn't sting so much. Safaricom is the big cheese in town right now, right? But Elon Musk is launching Starlink, right? That competes directly for the biggest source of revenue that Safaricom has had over the past 8 to 10 years, which is data. It doesn't make as much money from calls anymore. The majority of the money that it makes is from data. There is someone who is able to scale and who is able to aggregate better than Safaricom, who is going and has a global presence, meaning that Safaricom will no longer be the big brother in this neighborhood when it comes to that kind of thing, as an example, right? Now transpose that to what's happening in the media. I don't need to say how harmful or how debilitating the impact of people like Alphabet, Google, Facebook, Meta, right? Twitter even, have been on news cycles generally, but also on news, on business models broadly speaking. And the problem is, if we do not think collaboratively about how to retain value, how to retain that value of our content instead of giving it away and putting it on those platforms, then we'll continue to pay them. And eventually, Nation Media Group will become an outpost of Google in one way or another, as an example, right? And the Standard Group. It's already happening. So coming to my example, I think that, at least journalistically speaking, the best example that I can give about the power of collaboration has been with our collaboration with the ICIJ and the Pandora Papers reporting project. We wouldn't have been able to do what we did last year had we not collaborated. I wouldn't have been able to get into company registries in London or in Panama or in different places had I not collaborated. And it does mean giving away some of your editorial, the thing that we like to protect, that's space, right? It does mean being vulnerable in some ways. But we are at a point in time in our industry that if we do not start to look at one another as people who we can share with, then we will die separately. And we will be overwhelmed by the next big platform that does come to take our data and make it even more meaningful for our audiences. We're just lucky that right now the focus has been the West and different parts of the world. But the moment that these big behemoths turn to Africa, then our goose is cooked. And yet we are the ones who are the repositories of all of this data, all of this information, all of this institutional memory.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jambo. I'm glad that I'm meeting familiar faces, tunajuana in various ways, and scholars who have taught me, former colleagues in newsrooms, former classmates like Kwamuchesi. He was very tough. Hatukuwa tunamwona like Max huko mbele. Wanyama Chebusire will take you right at the doorstep of my home village. So I'm glad, former mentors in KBC, Topista, remember I would pronounce some words in Kiswahili and you would laugh because I have a very heavy Maragoli accent. Great, so my story is, it's a long one, but let me just say at some point I decided to quit the newsroom. Nothing was wrong. I was not pushed out. I had not done anything wrong. I just felt I needed to leave. And I was wrong on something. At some point I felt media journalists hakuna pesa, si watu wanauza sukari. I know you know of some prominent journalists who even have sold sugar. And I was like, I can't be like him. Little did I know, it's not as you think. I burnt my fingers in sugar and I'd borrowed some good cash which went like that, and then I realized I think it's not my area. At that time I was now gravitating towards leaving the newsroom. But yes, so my last employer was Royal Media Services. I left in January 2014. Then at that time I'm leaving. It's not that I'd prepared, that I have savings. No, there are no savings. I'd spent almost all my money kwa ugonjwa. My dad succumbed to cancer, and you can imagine, I had nothing. I just left with my phone, my head, my networks, and my laptop. But I was bored. I've written my stories. I'm normally very candid. I've shared a lot. And Emmanuel Juma, Linus Kaikai, wanajua, I would be bored being sent to cover James Orengo at a NEC meeting, I liked big projects, and even at, it's amazing, at some point at Royal Media Services, Mr. and Mrs. Macharia would send me to cover a funeral because it's a big person, and it's Alex Chamwada who has to go and cover the funeral. And I wanted to now practice from outside. So I left in good faith, but then it took a while for me to really do that thing I wanted to do. I came up with concepts. I wanted to work with the media, beginning with my former employer, but it was not easy. At some point, remember, now moved to NTV, to Nation Media Group. I met Emmanuel, Linus, and the other person was Justus Tharau and Peter Njigwa of commercial. So they liked my content. Emmanuel called me, wow, this is nice. But then there was the issue of commercial value. So how will we get money? We are being asked. So Emmanuel says, yeah, sasa hii, wanasema hakuna commercial value. So, But then I said, I'll cling on to this. I'll not go back to the newsroom. And it can be tough at one point. Then now I know most of you'd want to know, so is it possible? How will it happen? You may have support, maybe your spouse is still working, so maybe you can benefit maybe through maybe a medical cover she has and so on. So you have someone to support. Others may leave when they have invested, or rather they have saved, so you can buy cameras, for example. You can set up an office. But you can begin in various ways. At some point, my wife lost her job, so we were all jobless. But I said I'll not go back to the newsroom. Anyway, you can run an entity as an individual. When you leave the newsroom, for example, as we are privileged to have a certain advantages that others in other professions don't have. You are probably a good writer, you're a good presenter. You have networks, you know people. So you can begin somewhere. You can begin as an individual consultant, tap into your networks, and keep close to the various professional bodies, the Editors Guild, the Media Council of Kenya. Go to meetings where there are meetings. Make business cards. Of course, nowadays we don't use them. Express yourself. Say, I can moderate a function. Who knows? You may find in a month you've done ABCD, you have some 100K in your pocket. Or you could begin a company. Before I quit, I'd registered Chams Media Limited. It was registered on 31st December 2013. I don't know who was working on 31st December 2013. But I began one man, of course, with my co-director, who is my wife, working from home. My office was the dining table. So I was just a lone ranger running around. So, but then you see, you can grow, become, start getting talents to work with you. I got a very good camera person who was willing now to begin with me. Initially, you will get people who are willing to support you. You can now run into partnerships, get people can get you air tickets, and you just find that you are going. For me, then the breakthrough was when KTN News Channel began, and I was able now to have my content there. It was a good partnership, but I don't want to take so long, but to say now from what I learned with that arrangement, and here we are sharing because we are colleagues, it's for learning, it's not, you know what I mean. So the model of being paid can be quite challenging. So I was being paid for the content I was giving KTN. I learned a lot. One, it's good. It was a good beginning because then it was a marketing. It marketed me. Both we were benefiting from each other. But then there are certain challenges that come with being paid. What I can just tell you sincerely is don't quit the newsroom and think you'll sell content to media. You will die poor. Yeah, you find ways. Let me just forward and say, we grew and I changed my model to doing business with the media. So like when we moved my show, What You Know Me For, Daring Abroad, so we pay NTV. So we own the commercial rights. It's a long story how we make money. If I began, that's a long chapter. But you know the basics. The content itself, you can make money from it. Content integration, you see advertising on Daring Abroad. There are many ways, and then we have commercial time, which we sell. But Daring Abroad is not our biggest income earner. We have a documentary, so we run as a company. Now, the advantages of a company, you're able to do some things which you may not do as an individual. You're able to bid for jobs as a company. So we do quite a lot in terms of documentary. So we do proposals. Now, many things I didn't know when I was in the newsroom. If you asked me how an invoice looks, I don't know. A quotation, I don't know. A proposal. But I've learned on the job that I'm able to do many things. I know HR issues. So there are many things I learned now that I didn't know when I was in the newsroom. Then you develop a team. So I have a team that believes in my vision. I have 15 employees, and I work with about 10 freelancers at different points. So we sometimes just sit and say, let's do a proposal in ABCD. For example, Emmanuel Juma, when Emmanuel Juma saw a series, sorry, I'm referring too much, maybe I should look this side. Ushirika, a series about circles. I mean, he told me that is a gold mine. That, I never thought about that. So we went to Coop Bank and said, you see, circles have had image problems. So can we do ABCD, fund it, and we do a series on circles? And you've seen, so that series was 6 months. So you gain money now from production, and they buy the airtime, and it's aired where they want. You've seen me on Citizen TV, on NTV. So I'm able to do other things. In fact, Daring Abroad is not really giving us much money, but the name. So documentaries, so I'm just giving you examples of what you can do with your company using your skills when you quit your newsroom. The KTN model tied me that I would not appear on any other channel, but I was independent. But when I quit, and then I realized I can work with all media. So all media in Kenya, mainstream media, are our partners, and we do business with the media. They don't pay me, we do business with the media. I think that's within the topic, unless, so your skills, and never think you'll make money from selling content, or rather selling content to media to pay you. You see, I know you've discussed the topics. You see, advertising is coming down, they are struggling, but independently, you can run your entity and still do business with the media. Asanteni sana. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. I'm sure there'll be questions coming your way shortly. So the last speaker in the panel, on the panel, is Pamela Sitoni, and Pam will be speaking to us around leading a disrupted newsroom and working with a team that is somewhat demoralized or disgruntled. How do you navigate that?
Thank you, Prof. That's a tough one, but I'll try. So we all know what is going on in the media houses right now. If there was ever a time of disruption, it is now. And let me just try and focus this on retrenchment and how do you deal with a situation like that as a media leader. I think while when you have retrenchments, of course, it's an anxious time for everybody, and it's particularly very anxious for those who will end up being retrenched. But a lot of times we don't really remember to look at what happens to the so-called survivors, the ones who remain in the newsroom. And that is what we are dealing with right now at my place of work. I think for me, what surprised me most was a day after the exercise, a young man walked up to me with his resignation. And he's probably one of the best sub-editors in the entire newsroom. And I asked him why he was quitting, and he told me he was frustrated. And I tried to tell him he's really good at his work, and his bosses are always recommending him. And he said, I've been here since 2014. I've not been promoted, so I'm going. And then I asked him, how much are they, you know what every manager will say, how much are they offering you? Because you're thinking perhaps there's a wiggle room here that you can make him a counter offer. And he said, actually, I'm taking a pay cut. Then I asked him, why would you take a pay cut, leave a steady job? You're so good at your work. There's an opportunity. We are trying to reorganize. You might get a position. And he said, what guarantee do I even have that even if I stay, you will not retrench me next time? Or that even if you promote me, you will not retrench me? So I realized that we are dealing with people who, yes, they may have survived, but first, not all of them want to stay there because of what they've seen happening to their colleagues. They're anxious, they're demoralized, and they're looking at other options. So what is a newsroom leader to do in a situation like that? And maybe I'll just take from our own example and what we are trying to do, and then when we have a question and answer, we can discuss some more. But I think the first thing is the sensitivity with which you handle the matter. Again, on Wednesday when we had this exercise, I went into the newsroom and you could just tell the morale was really low. Nothing was moving. Even the pages were not moving. We were not going to meet our deadlines. And people said they were feeling paralyzed. And I think for me, the first thing was to, first of all, calm them and tell them that this is what has happened, this is why it had to happen. Be as honest as possible with people, and particularly just explaining to people that when it comes to a situation like that, retrenchment is really a no-fault termination. We don't let go of colleagues because they didn't do their jobs properly or because they made a mistake, but it's because of the business demands, and you have to be as honest as possible with those who are left so that they don't feel like there's something that their colleague did that put them on a list for retrenchment. So having very difficult but honest conversations, allowing colleagues to ask as many questions as possible and answering them very honestly. And then there's also, even as you talk about the retrenchment, there's the danger that you can find yourselves so sucked in feeling sorry for yourselves and the organization, but you still need to move forward. So again, letting colleagues know that those of us who are left have to pick up from where those who have left the newsroom have left and continue with the work. And sometimes it means demanding more of people, asking them to do more, a lot of times for less than their pay grade. And that is very difficult, but as a leader, you have to try and motivate your team. I think you have to also work hard to try and rebuild morale within the newsroom. I have no idea how we are going to do this at Nation Media Group, where it has just happened, but I'm sure we'll come up with a way where we can get colleagues to trust the leadership and to actually feel that we have a cause. And the last thing is to really be very clear on the new vision of the leadership. Where do we want to go, and how does everybody contribute to that vision, and set the structures in place. Be very clear about what structures you're working within and what objectives you have to achieve as a business, as a media house, and ask everybody to play their part. So that's all I had to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pam, for sharing, from a place of, such vulnerability. We'll take questions because some of our panelists have to catch the next flight. Questions from the audience to any member of the panel? I can see Komchetsi's hand is up. Juma, Gushu, our brother there. Sorry, I don't have your name, please. Okay. So let's see those hands again for the benefit of Diana. Okay.
Kwamchesi Makoha, thank you very much for very concise and on-point presentations. I'll just be very direct because of the time, especially Leo from CAK. There's half of the story is about broadband penetration is increasing, talking about 60% smartphone penetration is increasing. That the untold side of the story, the shared side of that story is that you have 40% that's unreached by broadband and 46% that's not on smartphone. What happens to that? You also mentioned the fact that we have 150 TV stations. One of the things that is unexplored in that story is the fact of how many of these TV stories from the time of the digital migration are actually surviving from year to year. Because I think the elephant in the room is a question of media sustainability. We were running a project with some members of Kenya Editors Guild on helping community media stations do human rights reporting, and it's providing some interesting results in terms of sustainability and connecting with audiences and helping people to understand who they are dealing with. One of the gaps that we do have, and that's the reason I'm asking this question, is that we do not have a very good understanding of audiences and how they are consuming media. And I know that you have a lot of that data, so I think it would be useful for you to help us to understand out of these 150 stations that were registered in 2017 post the digital migration, how many are still thriving, or are we just registering new ones and there is no sustainability on it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Gushu Ndogo. My question goes to actually the four panelists. Number one is for CK. You say that by 2026, digital revenue will be at par with the so-called legacy media revenue. What kind of revenue are you talking about so far? Currently, in terms of numbers, how much is going to digital media? How much is going to legacy? And according to your modeling or projection that you've used for that data, how much do you expect it to be at 2026, and in whose favor in terms of specific? Is it digital? Is it social media? Is it going to digital companies like Namus? Is it going to websites? Just a drill of the details of those numbers. Then, of course, Chamwada, maybe you should have told us how you make money also. It can inspire people to also make, instead of leaving that bit. Then for Namu, and I think now it touches on our seniors who are here, including Pam, Tanui, and the rest. On the most point of thinking collaboratively, I hope my accent has let that one come out clear. On thinking collaboratively. So, because I think he has a point, because as a print journalist for most of my life, I've never understood why we have 4 vans that live almost the same place, Mombasa Road. One for the Star, one for the People, one for the Nation, one for the Standard, all going to Mombasa. Instead of them working together and maybe saving that cost. 4 printing press, almost the same radius. Why can't we have one in Mombasa to print the Coast edition, have another one in Western, print the Western edition, and save on transport? So I think, just to buttress the point, that maybe media, we need to think collaboratively to survive. Thank you.
Justice Wanzala, in terms of collaboration, why wouldn't you, the media, think of mergers and acquisition, as my colleague has said, just because some of them surviving the market is becoming very tough. And on the other hand also, you realize that the disruption has taken a heavy toll on print and TV. Where is the situation of radio in all this? Is it able to navigate through? Because it's also a major platform in this country. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Abraham. I teach at Moi University. My question goes to all the panelists. One of the questions that I often get from students is it still worthwhile to pursue journalism as a discipline with all these disruptions, with all these, And the question I ask you is, at the philosophical level, not just at the skills level, but how should we prepare, journalists for that discipline? What do you think we need to inculcate in the people that you are training as we prepare them for that particular discipline? Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Some of the reasons given to these layoffs that we're seeing through the media, be it the BBC, CNN, is that they want to cut on wage bill. And another reason is that they want convergency, such that one reporter, when it goes to collect content, it goes to digital, TV, radio, and media. Radio. Now, the question is, how far has this compromised the quality of content? Because when some of us are watching TV and we listen to radio, you realize there are glaring gaps there. And how is this poor content contributing to the declining financial fortunes of the media, particularly the nation? Yeah, because at times you come across spellings in the first page, you wonder, could it be? And then 2, how true is it that some of these redundancies are meant to cut on people who earn a lot at the expense of the cheap labor you employ, as long as there's little panel beating that goes in there? Thank you. And then on John Allen Nam and Chamwada, msifungie sana. We need to know those innovative and creative ways of making money. Tafadhali, please come out explicitly.
Thanks, guys. Emmanuel Juma here. John, I just want to agree with you. Collaboration, guys, collaboration. Just before we went to elections, John sent out a tweet. And John was calling on media houses to start working together. He actually came up with a very novel idea and a suggestion on how best we can cover this election and be in a position to tally our own results, and communicate our own independent figures to the people of Kenya. I actually picked up that tweet and I got so excited, and I even called a few friends in the newsroom, and I thought they would take this idea up. I even called some senior guy at NMG. I sold him this idea, and I remember even speaking to John. I called him and asked him, "Hey, John, has anybody actually called you to take this conversation forward and how best we can actualize this plan and this project?" it was one of the best things that anybody had suggested at that time, but nobody ever reached out to him. And so when he talks about us not being able to collaborate and wanting to do things individually, and in that same process ending up being hanged separately, he is actually correct. Now, John paints a doomsday kind of a picture when he says that in 3 years, one of the big boys and girls of the media will be dead or will cease to exist in the form that we've come to, to know it by. A question now to Barrett. When you look in your crystal ball, who will be dead by then? I'm sure you must be having an idea, considering that you're already saying advertising is now moving into certain areas, and soon somebody will have to start paying that price. Just give us considering that Jones has painted that picture, just tell us, you as the regulator, who do you think will be breathing after those 3 years? Thank you.
The last one. Okay, my name is Roslyn. I think I also agree with some of the questions that have already been raised, but I still also want to weigh on the issue of collaboration. Maybe since John and Alex, you've already been out in the field, maybe you can guide us on this issue of collaboration, because at least you've touched and worked with all these media houses, even in terms of how you negotiate to have your content carried in the various platforms. And then this issue of the big techs, we've been talking about Facebook, Twitter, now TikTok is coming up, we have the IG, but I've not heard us having a conversation where we're also asking, do you also push for legislations where we can actually demand to also have a share? Because I saw like the Nordic countries have actually pushed for a piece of legislation on that matter. And for that, the media houses are able to get some money. But from our end, I think this is a conversation that maybe we have not had, and I think it's a conversation we need to look into. That yes, these are the main platforms that we have, but how best can we benefit in it? And then my last question is this issue of legacy. Do you see the legacy media actually fizzling out now that you're talking about the digital media? And where that put the issue of the content, which remains key vis-a-vis getting the commercial aspect of it? Because I think now there's a very thin line between how we get the commercials and how we still retain the content that we have to put across. Thank you.
Just a very quick one, Prof. I suppose because nobody has asked Pam many questions anyway. And I just wanted to find out, you've talked about leading a disgruntled team, and I think we're dealing with disgruntled teams all over, the media landscape in this country. And I just wanted to find out, in that kind of situation, Pam, how do you attract, retain, and motivate teams, given the fact that in any organization, people are actually the biggest asset any organization can have? And would that then actually lead or spell the death of organizations as we know it, media organizations as we know it? And in that context, you can imagine the quality of journalism that is going to be produced if you don't have quality people.
Thank you. I think we have all the questions. There's a question to Leo. How many stations are still thriving? Another question to Leo, what kind of revenue are we talking about? I think that was from Gushu. How much and in whose favor? So some detail around the projections that you shared. There's a question directed to Alex and John Allen. How are you guys making money? Give us a little more than what you said. You were very guarded with some of the details. And then I think there was a question, more or less a comment around, working collaboratively, and what that would look like. What is it that's stopping us? Maybe Pam can respond to that. There was a question around mergers and acquisitions, and maybe this is to Alex Chamwada and to Leo.
we don't seem to be talking about radio as much. What is the place of radio in all this conversation? Abraham Mulwo asks, is it still worthwhile to pursue journalism, and how should we prepare students in training for such a disrupted space? So that goes to all the panelists, maybe not all, to John Allen, to Pam, and to Alex Chamwada. I think, Pam, there's a question around convergence. Has this compromised the quality of content? And I think this was specifically asked to the Nation. I think this was Wanyama. And then again to you, Pam, redundancies. There's a question around, do they target those that earn a lot at the expense of professionalism? So that's for you, Pam. Emmanuel Juma, again, asks around working collaboratively. And I think he's asking Leo specifically to tell us who among the big boys and girls will be dead in 3 years. So if you can, focus and share that with us. Rosalind asks around legislation. Is this, can we push for legislation, John Allen, for the media houses to get some money? And do we see the legacy media fizzling out? I think that's for you, John Allen. And I think with that, there was one more question from Professor Nyabuga. How do you attract, retain, and motivate people in such a disrupted space? And I think this goes to Pam, to John Allen, and to Alex. So, Leo, do you want to go first?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the first question was about broadband, because there's actually gaps. I shared that we've got 53% of smartphone, and then we also have how much? We have 60% broadband. Yeah. So basically, there's a gap. Well, what I also want to clarify is by broadband, we actually define broadband to be, there's a speed which we have defined, which is 2 megabits per second. That's really the definition. But when it comes to basic internet penetration, actually it's higher. It's in the range of, is in 90s. So you're talking of 96% when it talks of internet penetration. But nonetheless, the gap is there. And in the authority, we've got what we call the Universal Service Fund. So we've got two strategies, actually. The licensees have got obligations which they meet every year based on their license conditions, and they actually they have been meeting. And there are areas where we identify through a study the gaps, because the Universal Service Fund is only administered after a study has been done and the area declared not favorable for market governing through the market forces, market strategy. So we have a strategy in place. We are implementing it, and it's not yet 100%, but we expect it to fill as we progress. But the assurance is for the kind of services we are talking about. You realize even that most of these news are clips, short, like even View Sasa, you just watch a short clip. So you can actually be able to, with a feature phone and even with that internet connectivity, actually you can be able to access it even without broadband. Nonetheless, the strategy for broadband is still there. Then when it comes to the TV stations, we recognize really that there are challenges, and I think in my remarks, the remarks of my DG, you actually acknowledge that even with the expansion, there's discourse in terms of sustainability. What we also realize is this is a long-term business. That's why we even give them a license term of 15 years, because we believe this is something that requires long-term investment, long-term return, and we have not, as the authority, we've not reached the position whereby we assess the people who are in the field. We've left it really to be a business issue, but we are open to discussions. For example, we have actually been making interventions, like we reviewed our license fees 3 years ago in response to, interventions requested from the players. So we are open to, inputs from the industry, but the first priority is for the industry to be innovative, because we believe the support by government may not be sustainable, but there's something the government can do. And as I was telling you, we've done something in terms of reviewing their fees based on their representations. When it comes to the statistics actually are being shared by, there's a global report by BWC, Entertainment and Media Industry Report 2022-2026 Outlook Report. This report was released by Pricewaterhouse, and it's looking at advertisement, projected internet advertisement revenue. And what it says is in the year 2021, actually they're quoting 144 million USD for internet, 98 for TV. And then they're also saying by 2026, because they were saying it was a one-time, so they did not want to be affirmative that it will remain that way. So the projection is that by 2026, they'll be at par. So for details, actually, you can refer to this report, PwC Global. I think Statista also has got some statistics also. Statista is also, it has got some statistics on digital advertising revenue market in Kenya. Then in terms of radio actually has not been left behind. Like I was mentioning, we are currently consulting on the digital technology for radio, digital sound broadcast, and you realize radio is more or less saturated. The market for radio is really saturated in terms of FM. So what we are trying to do now is to introduce digital sound broadcasting, so that we have more opportunities for new players, or even for the existing players to have additional channels. So that's something we are consulting on. So radio is not dead. But maybe the issue with radio is in terms of content. The content for radio may be more easy to generate than for TV. Maybe that's why it's not getting a lot of discourse. But radio is really in our radar, so it's not been forgot. So in terms of future, I want to say the future is for all of us. I think the future is, I think one thing about the existing traditional media is you've got credibility. You are a source of, even when somebody sees anything in the social media, they will want to counter check with you, or even the source of that information. Is it the handle from Citizen or from NTV? So you can actually leverage on your authenticity to be able to remain relevant. And what I'm saying also, when it comes to social media, you have more time. You have more time to do things you cannot do. Like when you are delivering news, you can go into details. And I think the other thing is connecting. If there's a story about fuel increase or GMO, I think if you can connect with the audience so that the audience feels connected, how does this affect me? Maybe there's a local person there talking about it. So I think those are the areas you can focus on, because the platforms, as I'm saying, the platform of delivery are expanding. So the only thing that will distinguish you is how you are connected to your audience, notwithstanding which platform. So the future is really there for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me begin with the question that was about the future of the journalists who are being trained. Yeah, of course, media houses will retrench, and I think that those who will still be employed. I think some retrench those who are perceived to have fat salaries, and then bring maybe 4 more to take over that position. So there is still a chance. The employment will still be there. But journalism is evolving. Every company can create content. So I know of companies, and that's how even I make money. I work with companies where I'm like their reporter. So in-house, you build capacity for companies, and there are those reporters who can work with companies so that they're able to tell their story. My area, maybe unlike Jonal and Nam's area, I live on PR, sort of marketing and my name, and I collaborate with the brands to market them. So it's open, and it's easy for me because then unlikely to run into trouble. We are creating content with those companies. So journalists in future are likely to be journalists working with entities so that they can tell their own stories. And there are many platforms. It doesn't have to be mainstream media. Companies are going into YouTube, using digital platforms to tell their stories. So journalists have a role there. How do I make money? I think I hinted. I said, I mean, for example, corporates come and we do a series. They are paying for the production. So I'll cost my labor. There is Alex Chamwada and the presenter called Alex Chamwada. There is value on that. So I have to cost that. I don't know. It depends. I can cost presenting a documentary, maybe 200,000 presenting as Alex Chamwada. But I have a videographer, I have a video editor, I have talents that are involved. So we cost for labor. So the client is paying us. We cost equipment. If you are using 2 cameras, it's different from using 1 camera. If the documentary is taking 1 day to film, it's different from a month. So there is a production fee to it, and you definitely make money. Then where we are doing media buying for entities, we charge a commission for media buying. So we are like a media buying agency. Then on digital platforms, on Champs Media YouTube channel, we make money. There are clients who come that we tell their stories and they just air on the YouTube channel only. So we'll charge YouTube channel as a TV airtime on YouTube channel, Champs Media, and the production and the professional fee of all the talents involved in producing that story to go on YouTube. We sell numbers, Champs Media digital numbers and my numbers as Chamwada. So we cost the numbers on my Twitter handle. Just this morning, I think I got some 30K by tweeting something for someone. So I have some, fuel. So we sell numbers. You wanted to know how I make money. So cumulatively then, but I don't want to say I'm rich, I have money. I'm satisfied with what I do. I have passion, but it's not the riches, it's not the money. That I'm able to sustain myself and my people. And there are many things we do without money, which are not an ordinary newsroom would do. Like daring abroad has been a misery to many people. I'm able to travel all over the world. If it was a typical way of per diems and the cost and air tickets and whatever, you won't sustain even for a week. So we have partners like Kenya Airways who will give us air tickets and they get a story from that trip we've done. I'm featuring a hotel in Ghana. Maybe a Kenyan there is a hotel manager. They're accommodating us for 2 weeks. While I'm there, there's a Kenyan offering transport. So there's a lot that goes on using our networks to make it happen. But it's not about money, money, money. So I'm happy, I'm passionate with what I do, but we're able to sustain ourselves. We have normal challenges like any other business entity. At times there's cash flow problem. Even currently the economy is not doing well. You may have clients who are yet to pay you. They may pay you in the next 3 months. You have salaries to pay. And like when you're employing, then you are just alone, even if the landlord is coming. You can imagine 15 people who are waiting, I pay them salaries. So if it's not there, I have that burden. So we have those challenges, abiding with KRA issues. So it's a company like any other, but because it's my own entity, I'm satisfied that I'm my own boss and I'm running talents who believe in what I'm doing. Most of my people I'm working with are even those who have never worked in a newsroom, who've grown with the talent. One of my presenters, Michael Zimanji, I picked him. He met me at Sitam Karen, and he's a lawyer by training, but I've taken him to KMC. We've made sure that they are compliant, and all of my talents are accredited by Media Council of Kenya. We have an office in Lodwar. We have an office in Kisumu. I've challenged an office in Lodwar. They know how to do proposals and so on. Just this week, they had a client, they charged 300,000 shillings to go produce a 4-minute clip that was for in-house use by a certain NGO. So someone was asking me, why an office in Lodwar? It's not to do news and compete in TV or KTN. We look for certain areas where we can tap and make some revenue. I think I've answered your question if you wanted to know how rich I am. But it's not about the money, it is making it work, that you can do so much without money and tapping into your networks. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try and run through as many as I can. The question on whether it's worthwhile to ask journalists to still be journalists, I think yes, but qualify that. It's important to train them with what is necessary, right? So what is the new journalist supposed to look like today in news media? It's a journalist who understands the marriage between data and storytelling, in my view. A journalist who doesn't understand how to read or structure data sets at this point in time is going to continue to tell the small story and not tell the bigger story. The bigger story is where the value is. People will always have the smaller story sent to them on their Twitter feeds, but who makes sense of it? And that's the space that journalists need to play in. And just to add to that, I think where we are in the media is, if you know what a well curve is, so it's, it's shaped like a well, essentially. And the well is our skill sets versus where we need to go. Right now we're heading down. The skills that we have are no longer necessary for what we, or less and less necessary for what we need to do today. What media houses need to do now, even as retrenchments are taking place, is to train and train heavily. That's one of the places where media houses need to be making the biggest investment. The biggest investment needs to go into the people at this point in time, not so much in retaining cash, even though that's still also a business model question. I think still on the same question and the various iterations of the question, there's a few things that we need to consider. Today, pressure is on wage bills, right? Pressure is on convergence and, generally speaking, on labor relations. That's a consequence of the kind of competition that we're facing globally and locally, the innovation that's happening locally and globally, and of course the question of the value. What value do you bring in the marketplace, right? And I don't mean this like as I mean it both as true commercial value, but what is the intrinsic value of journalism today? And do we ask ourselves often enough, if journalism is a public good, who then pays for it? I think that's a really central question, because we're interested in public interest journalism. If public interest journalism is a public good, who pays for it? That I think I leave to you. There's someone who asked about what the model looks like in the future. I think the model is going to be focused a lot around individuals rather than conglomerates and corporates. Safaricom and EABL, from what I've been hearing, have increased their digital spend on media, digital media buying by about 20% this year, right? Those are the biggest two spenders on media buyers locally. But a huge percentage of that is going to individuals. There's a certain musician, I won't say who has pocketed a clean 30 million shillings, right, from one of these guys. One person, right? Ask yourself what the monthly revenue was for KTN in just 1 month. Did they make 30 million? And that's one person. So we need to start thinking about who our talent is internally. How do we start to surface them better, train them, and let them be ambassadors for the kinds of things that we want to do? We need to stop being so tethered to our brand names and start being tethered to the idea of the kind of value that we are delivering to our audience. And audiences trust people, they don't trust brands. At least that's what I've been observing. Keys to collaboration, 3 things: trust, skills, and value. Do you trust the person that you're collaborating with? What skills do you bring to the table? And what value do you add to that collaboration? So don't go there. Like, I'll give you an example. I can't go to Royal Media right now and say, okay, my value is that I'm John Allen. I have X number of followers on Twitter. They'll just turn around and tell me, but 30% of digital traffic during news is ours. Why do we need you? So I need to figure out what my value is in that kind of partnership for it to be an equal partnership. And yeah, finally, just on reviewing business models, I'll give the example of vehicle sales. Vehicle manufacturing companies do not make their money from selling cars. They make their money from after sale service, right? Look at what's happening in the vehicle in the vehicle business right now abroad. General Motors is starting to service Tesla vehicles. Why? Because the movement is towards EVs, right? And you understand. So how do you reconfigure yourself as a big legacy media house into providing value for the entire market, as opposed to retaining that asset that you have simply because it's a factor of production? You need to start thinking about how broadly you can spread that value that you've invested in and cultivated. I don't know if I have time because I'll miss my flight. But just to say thank you and thanks for your attention, Santini.
Thank you. And if you see, Pam still has to respond to her questions, but if you see Alex and John Allen leaving, it's because they have a flight to catch. Do you want to say bye?
Really, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't mean to do this. Personally, I've had another flight to, supposed to be in Lodwar tomorrow morning, so I need to be in Nairobi. So I would have really wanted to be here and stay with you. So I'm not just leaving. I think Alan the same. But we really appreciate, ladies and gentlemen, you are friends. I've not mentioned a lot because I work a lot with the people in the newsrooms. You know, the editors know. We share a lot of content to newsrooms. There's a lot that I couldn't have said here. Maybe we need a bigger lesson. And the collaborations we are talking about is when you are inside, we are outside. We need each other. We need each other. Not for tweeting or for sharing. Last year, Champs Media spent about 80 million shillings to mainstream TV in Kenya. I'm not saying that's how rich I am. It's because of media buying and money channeled through Champs Media. The people are still keen to know the money. So that's the value and how we're able to collaborate with the media. So media are our friends, and we can't do it without media. And what I'm doing probably I could have still done from inside, only that there are reasons why it can't be done from inside. There are many, many things we could have said. Politics, I've done ABCD for politicians, but politicians are very risky to work with. And a model where for me it was a think tank with Jubilee under President Uhuru Kenyatta, but I was able to do ABCD with them without going into much trouble. But just a typical political party and politicians, you'll run into trouble. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe I should start with the question that I'm passionate about. Is it still worth it to train journalists, and can you still tell the young people that you're training that it's worth studying journalism? I think yes, and John has talked about the skills, but also you need to train these young people not so much with an eye on employment and what they're going to make out of journalism. It's not a career that pays much, but it's about the role of journalism in society, and that role is never going to go away. It doesn't matter if the newspapers eventually die off or the legacy medias close down. There'll be organizations like this and John Allen Namus that will sprout, and journalism will still have a big role in society. So please continue investing in young people and continue motivating them to be journalists and to be great journalists. On the questions of retrenchment, is it true that the media houses mainly target the more experienced, highest paid journalists? Unfortunately, that is true, and I'm speaking now as PAM editor like everybody else, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the media house. But the truth is that the reason why media houses retrench is because they are trying to save on their staff costs. And it's unfortunate that the staff costs are heaviest with the most experienced journalists, and who have served for a very long time. So if you actually, it's almost cruel because you have a figure to work with. So you don't even envy the media managers, because if you're told cut your payroll by 50 million shillings, how many reporters who earn 100,000 shillings are you going to have to get off the payroll to reduce the payroll by 50 million? But you see, if you target a few editors who are very well paid, then you easily get to that amount. So unfortunately, that is how the formula that is used in most media houses. And you're right about the fact that it affects quality. Of course, if you are laying off somebody who's been there for 20 years, 15 years, and you're expecting that that work is going to be done by someone who's just done journalism for 5 years, you don't have the same level of experience. So yes, the quality definitely is affected, and those are now some of the challenges that the leadership that is left within the newsrooms, the media houses, will have to work with and see how to deal with. Prof, how do you attract, motivate, and retain talent at a time like of disruption like this? For me, I think for media leaders, you have to summon all your emotional intelligence. So it's about how you speak to people and what you tell them. I really believe in honesty. I believe that as a media manager, you have to be honest enough with your team to tell them what the situation is and where you're trying to go, and inspire them, because you have a vision and you think that if you get there, you will actually manage to stabilize and they can have a stable place to work. And you get them to trust you. But it's really about how honest you are with your team, and you cannot lie to them. You just have to be really honest with them. You have to give them a reason to believe that there's a future there by mapping out. So you map out and you say, if we do this, we'll probably end up with profitability at a certain level and things will get better. And I think there are examples of other media houses that have gone through this kind of situation and are actually now on an upward trend. So there's reason to hope in the future. And just simple things like ensuring that you have a counselor, people can have somebody to speak to, and you allow people to speak freely. On convergence, I think convergence, it depends a lot on how you approach it and how you do it. I'll tell you an example. For example, at Nation Media House, Nation Media Group, you have sometimes for one assignment, you have a reporter and a photographer from Daily Nation going to cover an event. Then you have one from Business Daily going to the same place to cover the same event, and you have one from NTV, a team going to cover the same event. If you converge those resources, really, you just need 2 people. And you have to balance it out so that even when you're sending those 2 people, they are going to bring you a quality story. So there has to be a point of where you do the quality control and where you pick the best talent. But even as you converge, it doesn't mean that everything has to be converged. There'll still be stories that will be very exclusive to just the one newspaper, and the papers themselves and the TV station, they still have a place where they compete. But on some of the common things where you can combine resources, you converge so that you have efficiencies in your processes. I think I've answered all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the panel deserves a better clap. Thank you very much, Leo, Pam, Alex, and of course, John Allen in absentia. Thank you also for your attention. I will close this and hand over the microphone. Is it to Professor Nyabuga or Professor Mugambi? Oh, Professor Nyabuga.
And Professor Buka obviously deserves a big clap, isn't it? And of course the panelists. And before I invite Professor Mugambi, as per the program, there is one session that we did not have. One very, very important session, media and biodiversity. And of course, because the constitutional matters were very important. And unfortunately, many of the panelists left. But one of our key supporters is still here, and that's Victor Koyer, who's the VP Digital Power Southern Africa, Smart PV from Huawei Technologies. And this comes, of course, at a time when we're worried about climate change and issues surrounding, how to save the world, so that, we subscribe to what one of the panelists said is that the future is for all of us. So how do we ensure that we save this world for all of us, for posterity, and that the media is particularly involved in advancing the narrative of climate change, but also saving the world that belongs or ought to belong to all of us. So Victor, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Should I say it's evening or 1 hour to evening? Right. I had a presentation prepared for you, but I think I'll take you through the journey of Huawei just to understand about Huawei. So my name is Victor Koyer. I'm the Vice President of Huawei Digital Power. So maybe just for everyone is that we know Huawei who they are. So typically Huawei, they are a big telecommunication company that Chinese, but blah blah blah. But what we are currently doing that in Huawei, we are now pivoting towards energy and also transportation. So we are pretty much coming up with solutions that will be essentially be used to support the emerging market. And the emerging market is purely now, everyone is talking about carbon neutrality. So carbon neutrality is a very key aspect that we are currently seeing. And we're also seeing quite a number of governments. Like if you look at Kenya government, they have a mandate to go to carbon neutrality by 2050. And the good thing is that Kenya also has 98% penetration in terms of renewable energy. So under Huawei, in terms of how we achieve the green energy, so we have a division called Digital Power, and that Digital Power addresses different business units. So we have business units that essentially support the Smart PV. So Smart PV is, we have different scenarios for Smart PV. So Smart PV is typically when you're using the PV panels. But we have different scenarios. So we have at least 3 scenarios. We have residential scenarios, we have commercial industrial scenarios, and we have utility scenarios. I'll address each one. So under utility scenarios, we typically use our inverters. So an inverter's use is typically trying to harness the DC and changing it to AC. So we have supplied to quite a number of, let's say, plants across the world. And also, if I can give you an example of a place in Kenya, is in Garissa. So Garissa, we did a 55 megawatts plant, which is injecting to the utility. And if you're looking at the commercial industrial space, so for the commercial industrial space, we are more or less looking at a scenario whereby maybe the end user of the or the off-taker is keen to off-take or offset some of the electricity cost. So we know that the pain point for each and every person, so like you as a media owner or the media company that you're working in, you consume quite a lot of electricity. And this electricity can be offset by use of solar power. So we typically create that need by use of this technology on the inverter side. And in most cases, people always have maybe an offset of maybe 30 to 40% of the electricity cost. And what we see that in the coming, let's say 2 to 3 years time, since most of them are essentially offsetting 30 to 40%, we are seeing a transition whereby most of these companies will be also looking on how to extend this offsetting maybe to 70%. So this is you always come up with a solution such as energy storage systems. So energy storage systems is whereby we're using the battery pack, whereby during the day solar works, and at night is when the battery kicks in. So this is now the new trends that is coming pretty much well in most of the development countries, but also in Kenya. I think in the near future we'll be having some plants which have such solutions. Then the other solution that we have is more on the residential side. So we know that the pain point of most of you're here is that you always want to remove Kenya Power out of your residence or your villa. So we have solutions which are over there. So we have two types of solutions that we are selling as Huawei. So we have hybrid solutions which essentially can be used in the off-grid scenario. And also this similar solution, you can also couple it with solar panels. You can also couple it with a DG, diesel generator, just to support provision of electricity in your house. Then for the guys who are typically now in maybe they're living now in the urban places, so we have a solution now which is called Luna. So the Luna, what typically it does, it's a complete set of a solution which has the inverter, it has the battery pack, and it has an enabled ecosystem that will support you to offset some of the electricity consumption that you use. So remember this in terms of the energy yield generation. When you are using solar panel optimization is normally from around 10 a.m. to around 4 p.m. That's when the yield is a bit high. But when the yield is not there is when now the battery kicks in. So we have solutions that are essentially made for such purposes. That's on the smart PV side. So we have different other solutions that we are looking on how to bring the green energy to various industries. So you know that Huawei, we are working with quite a number of telecommunication companies. So we are providing power, which is called the site power, to the base stations. So you know most of these base stations are typically using DG or diesel generators. So we are providing them a solution, a compact solution that will essentially support them in terms of offsetting the use of diesel generator, because we know that we have quite a lot of issues going on in terms of the macro landscape regarding the fuel, because every time the fuel cost keeps on fluctuating and goes up. Then we also have a solution essentially targeting the data centers. So we have a data center facility where we provide a holistic prefabricated container, which essentially it supports some of I think some of the media's houses, and also some of let's say end-to-end customers like the banks that they need information, or they need so a place where they can keep the storage. So we have the data center facilities. Then we also into electric vehicles. So the buzz everywhere globally, everyone is talking about EV. So under Huawei, what we do, we have two transition on EV side. So what we do for electric vehicles, so we come in with the technology in terms of the software. So we have a solution called the Harmony OS, which supports the entire e-drive of the vehicle, and also the engine capability. Then we also into the infrastructure side, whereby we have solutions such as the the charging stations, maybe for residential or maybe for a commercial use. Uh, in this entirely scope is basically what we do as Huawei, and what we are aiming to do specifically in Kenya is that we understand that majority of people are keen on use of solar. So we are collaborating with quite a number of various ecosystem partners. So like for instance, we understand that the drive towards renewable energy also needs investments. So we are collaborating with different investment companies that are keen on pushing the agenda for renewable energy. So we have commercial lenders, we have also anchor investors, we have people that are coming in to support. So for the residential space, we also collaborating with maybe the commercial lenders, maybe the banks, and also some of maybe the VC companies that are keen on giving a solution essentially for the residential space. So the residential space is also a very key market for us, considering the high cost of electricity that we see. I think we normally have different variation in terms of electricity costs. So the electricity cost in Kenya keeps on increasing by at least, we normally give it an escalation of around 8% per year. So this means that if you're buying a solution maybe from Huawei, the ROI would be maybe you're looking at at least 3 to 4 years, depending with the usage that you are using it for. But also what we are seeing is that most of let's say the commercial industries. So like if you are maybe if you came through Mombasa, the Mombasa airport, we have Huawei solution that is powering the entire airport, and also the Jomo Kenyatta airport. And also we have a couple of other solutions that are supporting other industries within the space. So what we see, media will support us in terms of this transition. So as a purely O&M manufacturer, so we believe in our technology, and we need the media or even the editors to provide factual information to the audience. So meaning that the technology is there. So we need to engage, we need to collaborate and see how we can address the need of the green energy technology, because that's where everyone is heading to. And we believe that if we tap to that, we're going to have a successful venture between us and yourself. So with that, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Victor. And I'm not going to say anything more. Let me invite Professor Hezron Mugambi to moderate the next session. And I think he might, well, he should be coming up with the panelists.
Good evening. It's always not very nice to come last, but sometimes it is also good because you perhaps may end up getting more time than the rest. So however, we want to take the shortest time possible to be able to deal with the last topic in the day, which is underreported issues. And here we are looking at refugees in Kenya and the issues which revolve around how receptive Kenya as a country is to them, the issue about integration and citizenship, and generally how the media then is involved in ensuring that refugee issues are handled within the context of the Kenyan environment. This year's World Refugee Day, the theme was whoever, wherever, whenever, everyone has a right to seek safety. But safety comes with responsibility upon governments, and governments, as we know them, have to be pushed to be responsible enough. And the media then comes in to set the agenda for the media, for the government and responsible agencies to be able to deal and ensure that refugees' rights are protected as the Constitution dictates. So with me is a big panel of 6 who will dissect this topic and so that we have a discussion after that. I think they will do their presentations. I've been requested that they do it from here, and then they will go sit back. Then after that, we'll have the discussion and the questions thereafter. So just to introduce them, we have Sumaya Moku, just by show of hand, to your right. Then we have Daniel Kalinaki from Uganda, just right there to your left. Victor Nyamori, Dr. Abraham Mulwa from Moi University, and then Razia Mwawanga from Tanzania. She has been here. To your left, we have Basimwa. I always shorten his name because it's very long. Mulema Gabo. So I always call him Bisimwa Mule because it's a bit short. It's my friend. Basimwa is just in the center here. So they'll take us through discussions on how the entire refugee issues are dealt with, both within the country, regionally, and give us the perspectives from the different countries and institutions which they represent. The Kenya Editors Guild has been working on different projects with their various organizations where they come from in a view of ensuring that the agenda on refugees is represented well within our media contexts, Kenya being one of them. So we want to start from a general perspective, and I want to call upon Dr. Abraham Mulwa from Moi University to give us a general perspective about media representation on the issue of refugees. Then we move in that direction, and then move into the country-specific policy and constitutional issues and legal frameworks which relate to refugees. So a clap for Dr. Mulwa.
Thank you very much, Prof. My name is Abraham Mulo. I teach media and communication at Moi University, where I'm currently serving as the Dean of the School of Information Sciences. My topic was intersectionality of media, academia, and policy issues in the context of refugees. And I'll begin this presentation with my reflections of my childhood when I was a bit younger. In the 1980s, I think at that time there was instability in our neighboring country in Uganda. And during that time, I was in primary school, and the local, so you can guess my years if I was in primary school, 1980s. So during that time, my local high school had 3 teachers who were essentially refugees from Uganda, but they were teaching in our high school. At the same time, my father was, he passed on last year, was a small-scale tea farmer. And we used to have a worker called Patrick. I still remember him very well because he was a very good friend of mine. He usually used to assist me with my homework when I was young. He was a very intelligent guy, but he was working in our farm. So I didn't get his story. I was still young. I couldn't document his story, but I wish I had kept his contacts because I would love to talk to him and understand. Because he was, at that time, I would find that he was quite intelligent, and he really assisted me. Now, forward to around 2015, we had a migration crisis in Europe, which was fueled by the war in Syria and the instability generally in the Middle East. And at that point, there was a huge debate because there was a huge migration towards Europe. And there was a huge debate about whether these were migrants or refugees. And I think around April 2015, Al Jazeera did a documentary on, the labeling of these migrants. Some were labeled refugees, some were labeled economic migrants. And I think at some point, Edwin Cameron described them as a swarm of people. And there was a huge debate as to whether these people were migrants or refugees. Now, I use Al Jazeera, the Inside Story by Al Jazeera. It's a 25-minute clip. I usually use to teach my students about agenda setting, because this was very important. The use of those labels, whether they were labeled as migrants or refugees, had an important impact on how they were treated by the host countries. So that when they are labeled migrants, they were denied some of the services that ordinarily would be accorded to refugees. And this brings us to our conversation today on the intersectionality of the media, academia, and policy issues. When I looked at this topic, I looked at what is common between the academia and the media. And what is common is our idea of, or our work of representation. The academia and the media are both central in production, dissemination, and even consumption of cultural knowledge. That is the information that we generate about refugees. And thereby, we provide our audience, which includes policymakers, with the analytical tools with which they make sense, or we all make sense of refugees. So we do this through the choice of language, the choice of imagery, the labeling, and research. As academics, what kind of research do we do about refugees? What is our focus? What are the issues that we try to bring out? When we represent refugees in the media, how do you represent them? What kind of language do we use when we talk about refugees? What kind of imagery do we use? How do we label them? And these are important because these labels form the basis within which the general society frames its discourse on refugees, but also importantly, how the policymakers conceptualize issues around refugees, and therefore, how do they make policies regarding the refugees. So I want to pose a number of questions. Being a teacher, we like posing questions. From the media perspective, how do we tell stories about refugees? Do we reflect them as, or do you represent them as victims of violence? Do you represent them as agents? Do you represent them as immigrants or as refugees? Do we, what kind of images do we show of refugees? A few years ago, there was a debate around Dadaab and the desire by government to shut down or to close Dadaab. And there was a lot of discussion about whether it was necessary to have refugees there or not. And how do we talk about them? When we reflect on that, how do we write about these refugees? What stories do we tell about refugees? What images do we give about refugees? And therefore, how do these inform the public discourse and also the policy discourse regarding our treatment of refugees? What aspects of their stories do we tell? You know, do we reflect on whether there are certain aspects of stories we don't tell? For example, the talents within the refugee communities, for example, the skill set within the refugee communities. Sometimes I get amazed. I watched one of the athletes who was actually a refugee in Kenya, and I think there are quite a number, who are refugees in Dadaab, and they went abroad. Right now they are running for those countries. They are making money for those countries. They are contributing to the economies of those countries. So in our representation of our refugees here in Kenya, do we tell the stories about certain salient issues that we don't talk about? Do we reflect on whether we have certain skill set that we can tap on? Do we reflect on whether there are certain talents among this population and how they can contribute in building the economy? Importantly, do we give space to the voices that are agitating for the refugee inclusion in our local media? As academics, our research shapes public policy on refugees, and therefore, what are the issues that are represented in our scholarly research, and how are they represented? What do we focus on? What is our research agenda with regards to refugees? And also, to what extent do we involve refugees in our academic research, and how do we involve them? Do we involve them as just sources of data? Do we involve them as research assistants, or do you also involve them as collaborators and co-authors? Do we give them a space where they can actually tell their story from their own perspective? And this applies both to the media and the academia. Finally, again, how does academia prepare upcoming journalists to appreciate the varied experiences and contexts of refugees? Refugees are not an homogeneous group. There are many refugees that are coming because of different reasons. So how do we represent them? How do we prepare journalists to be able to appreciate this variety? So as I conclude, because we have very, very short time, I want to say that media and academia play a pivotal role in the production, dissemination, and consumption and of knowledge regarding refugees, and thereby they influence either positively or negatively the public discourse and action, including policy making with regards to refugees. I also want to mention that refugees are not a homogeneous group, and therefore contextualization is key in our representation of refugees. Also, we need to hear the voices of refugees, both in the media and in academia. We give them space to articulate their experiences and to tell us their story from their perspective, so that the audiences, which include policymakers, have a chance to comprehend and to have a broader understanding of that debate. Finally, the media and academia should critically interrogate the commonly held beliefs about refugees and provide more accurate depiction of the diversities within the refugee population. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mulwa, on the fact that the media in Kenya perhaps represents refugees in their vulnerabilities and forget so many other things which are not negative. For example, he has posed about the economic aspect or contribution of refugees within the context that they find themselves, and generally their resilience. I now want to welcome Razia Mwawanga. Razia Mwawanga comes to us from Tanzania. a member of the Tanzania Editors Forum, experienced producer on radio, TV, also to share with us experiences from Tanzania and how the media has been handling the refugee issues. Razia, welcome.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Just to build on what the previous speaker has spoken about, and I need to make a disclaimer. I am not a refugee expert. I'm just a journalist. Okay, so as of current, Tanzania has 248,000 refugees as of August this year. And over 4 decades, Tanzania housed so many refugees because we are surrounded by DRC, we are surrounded by Rwanda and Burundi. So most of these refugees came and they stayed for so long. But then in 2017, 142 were repatriated. They decided to go home. So we still have few refugees compared to how things were before, and most of these people are still there. They have been put in camps, and they are in Kigoma, and that's where most of them are. And another thing is that the government of Tanzania has tried to issue certificates, because we find that most of these people are stateless, just to give them some identity. And also, despite all those efforts that have been done, we've had still challenges. Whatever funding that is provided, it only covers 27% of all the amount of money that is needed to provide all these services. So just to go to what I wanted to say, okay, my role is to say role of media in advancing underreported issues in the context of refugees. So this topic is not very interesting because some of us sitting here, we are like, why should I care? Why should media care to report these issues? To me, I see this as a very critical issue because it is an opportunity for journalists to make something right that has been wrong. Because these are people who have been displaced, people have been taken from their homes without wanting to be out of their homes. So for journalists, sometimes when you try to report this, we find it is sometimes we do not have the right angles. We look at it as a compassion issue. We look at it as a fatigue and a depressing war story. We don't want to talk about these things because forever we've been talking about refugees. Nothing has really changed. So what other angle? Because what we report on is, okay, war has broken down, they have moved, they are living in camps, bad conditions, violence, and all those other things. But why? We as journalists, we should continue to have this conversation because we need to remind people that there is something that needs to be done to make sure that these people go home, live in better conditions. So it is a human rights issue, and that unlike other people, for us we are free, but for these people they need to be recognized and they need their rights to be taken care of, because here we talk about individual rights and collective rights. Their individual rights have been taken by war. So they can no longer do their productive roles. They've been housed and they've been turned. These are career people, but now they are just living and doing nothing except farming and doing some vocational work. So it is a human rights issue and it needs to be addressed so that these survivors can find comfort and something to do. Another thing is that why should we do this? Because it's to promote responsible and accountable journalism. Because if we don't remind people what is happening, we need to tell people the impact of war and what it does to people, to make sure that we can work out our differences and make sure that there are no wars, people are not displaced, that people live and enjoy the rights that they have. And also refugees, as we see them as terrorists, we see them as survivors, we see them as criminals, we see them as people who have imposed on us. They've come to take our land, to take our resources. So we see them as enemies. But one thing that we do not understand is that it is not, partly it's by their doing, but some other things they've been forced on them. So we need to help them and not see them as enemies, but to support them become better people. And also, so much money has been put into rehabilitation of these people, but does this money go to the right people? Do they get the right services that they desire? So this is the role of journalists, to interrogate and ask those questions. Is the value of the support they are getting equals to the services they are getting? Another thing, it's about gender-based violence, because you find these people are stateless, they don't belong anywhere. Nobody has accountability over them. So people prey on their innocence. They take them, they sell them into slavery. Some of them are trafficked, sex workers. So it is the role of journalists to tell those stories and remind the governments that where these people are, that they are people that needs to be protected despite their being stateless. And another thing is that in terms of the environment, we cannot talk about the environment, because you find that in most of these places where they are, like for Kigoma and Dadaab, when you find all those places where they have been, they look like deserts. Why? Because they've cut down trees. So we need to address and remind people of the impact, what happens when you have so many people invading one particular place. So that the responsible people can look for different ways to mitigate the situation and make sure that the environment is conserved and climate change is prevented. And another thing is in terms of integration, as the previous speaker was talking about. These people, they are not just useless. These people have careers, they've got lives. These people were doing something where they were from. So it's also nice to identify the things that these people are doing and try to give them meaningful skills and opportunities so that we can integrate them and they can become useful, so that they can forget the trauma, the stigma, and the pain of what they have faced. And also, just another thing is that we need to copy. Some of these people came, like for example in Tanzania, the ones that came, most of them have been employed in farms. They are very hardworking. They are very sincere people. They can teach our people a thing or two. So for us journalists, instead of just seeing them as a burden, we can also copy those good things that these people are doing and try to tell our people, copy them, because they've taught our people the culture of working hard. So, and also when we try to, as I finish up, we need to, when we report about refugees, we need to speak, we need to give that, to give them a human face, the impact of what they have been going through and the impact it has, because these people have been tortured, these people have been violated, so they come with all the hurt and the pain. And when they come, if that thing that they have inside is not controlled, is not addressed, they become violent, and that violence rubs into the community. So if we address the challenges that these people face, we can help have good neighbors that we live together in peace. And also another thing is that we should be empathetic, because today we are sitting here, we are very judgmental, we don't want to report those stories, we think nothing can be done. But then tomorrow, you never know, tomorrow it might be you might be a refugee running away from somewhere. So we should help them and also be prepared, so that because if we don't speak for them and do something, it can happen to us and we'll have nowhere to run. For us, they ran into Tanzania. So we are trying to maintain peace in the region, so that if anything happens from us within, at least we can have a safer place to go. So to finish up, also when we talk about these things, sometimes we take advantage, because these people are stateless, they don't have any rights, so we don't protect their privacy, we exploit them, we work on their vulnerability. So we should try to be humane when we cover these stories. Although we want to attract people's attention, we should understand their feeling, where they're coming from, and put those stories, give it a human face, give it an innovative angle, make it innovative, put some infographics in there, put some music, bring the good and the bad, not only the bad, because it's not only the bad, but also there is something good. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Razia. Talking about generally the myths and realities about refugees. that these are semi-skilled and skilled individuals who have come to compete with us about resources which are very meager in our country. And the fact that some of them are talented and can actually, and educated and can, if facilitated, can contribute and do contribute to the economy where they are, for that matter, Tanzania, Kenya, and the rest. So I want to give this chance to Bisimwa Mule, as I said. He carried out a study in Kenya about the bottlenecks and challenges which refugees face in trying to acquire documentation so that at least they can make a living out of the skills that they have, or even settle in situations, in particular in Kenya. So Bisimwa, please come and share with us in some few minutes so that it can also inform debate. Let's welcome Bisimwa.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. And thanks to Dr. Abraham Razia for the first presentations. My name is Bisimwa Mlemangabo. I work for the Refugee-Led Research Hub. Refugee-Led Research Hub is an initiative of the University of Oxford and the BIA. BIA is a British Institute in Eastern Africa. So I was given a task to reduce a research report of about 50 pages to a 5 minutes presentation, and I will try to do that. So we conducted a study on access to permanent residency and citizenship in Kenya, and trying to look at integration issues, what challenges refugees face while trying to integrate in Kenya. So that study was conducted from about May to July this year. And just to give a sense of, as a background, the Kenyan government, the history of hosting refugees in Kenya dates back to the 1960s, as I think Abraham hinted on it. And then it was kind of an influx from Uganda, Ethiopia, and Somalia mainly. But the numbers kept growing until today we have, I think, about 500,000 refugees in Kenya, a majority of whom live in the two camps of Dadaab and Kakuma. So, but what we are saying is that refugees are facing a challenge integrating into the local community, especially accessing permanent residency and citizenship as ways of sustainable integration. So there are many refugee communities that are living in a protracted situation, and they have no prospects of either going back home or accessing resettlement, which are the two alternative durable solutions for refugees. And so they face some of the challenges. We try to look at those challenges by conducting interviews. We mainly did quantitative interviews and some few focus group discussions in 4 locations in Kenya. That was in Mombasa, in Nairobi, Kakuma, and Dadaab. So we reached out to 222 refugees, and of those, only 38 refugees had actually applied for permanent residency and citizenship. So we tried to find out what challenges they faced in the process of application, and there were 3 major challenges. One was unclear guidelines. 2, it was kind of lack of legal support. And then 3 was the fact that they were already registered in the refugee database. So it was very difficult for them to get off the database. So now, of those who applied, only a few were able to actually were granted citizenship. So what we see is from the 38 who actually applied, only 8 were granted citizenship, and the remaining were not granted. But again, there were no reasons for denying them citizenship. So they were not given reasons for denying them citizenship. And what we saw is the time it took from the application, like submission of the application, to actually getting a response was too long, about 9 months for them to get feedback. So that was those were some of the big challenges. But again, we tried to find out if refugees were actually willing to apply for citizenship and permanent residency. And what we saw is the majority of those who interviewed were willing to apply for one reason or the other, because some of them had lived in Kenya for decades and felt they were more Kenyans and had no prospects for returning back home. Some of them were born in Kenya, and some are actually refugees from mixed marriages between Kenyans and a refugee. We particularly looked at issues that those children faced, refugees from mixed marriages, and we found that these children were not given their rights because according to the Constitution of Kenya, they are eligible to accessing citizenship, but they were not, thereby denying them their rights. So we are working closely with a number of stakeholders, and this particular research is kind of is part of a wider project that we are working on to see, to look at issues of integration and how refugees can be supported to access citizenship. So the other challenge is, now this is from the qualitative or the focus group discussions that we had with refugees from these locations. So we found that refugees cannot access government online services to apply for the KRA PIN or work permit. Thereby, this actually prevents them from owning immovable assets or actually accessing work permits, which are also a prerequisite for accessing permanent residency. And this is particularly due to the fact that refugee IDs are not recognized in government registration systems. So overall, we find that there are structural and systemic barriers to refugee integration in Kenya. There were no clear guidelines for refugees to apply and access permanent residency and citizenship. And even those eligible refugees continue facing these challenges in the application process. So, what are we recommending? For the government to ease their administrative processes for refugees to access citizenship and permanent residency. This can be done, for example, by recognized refugee IDs into the government registration services, like the e-citizen, We also recommend for international organizations and the civil society actors to lobby and support government through policy-related discussions to put up policies that allow refugees to access residency and permanent and citizenship. For research institutions to conduct or support research projects that actually show the benefit of hosting refugees, especially messages looking at what is a refugee contribution to their own development, but also to the development of the host communities. So we urge all international organizations and civil society actors to work with government, but also kind of come up with messaging or messages that show the value or the benefits of hosting refugees, rather than looking at refugees as being a threat or a security threat. So briefly, those are some of the key findings and recommendations that the study gives. I thank you for listening. I look forward to some of the questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bisimwa, for taking the shortest time. I know that I've looked at the research, it's very long, but being able to summarize the challenges, bottlenecks the refugees face. I don't want to take more time on summarizing or talking about what Bisimwa has just presented, because the next speaker, Sumaya Moku, will give us perspectives about the legal challenges, because she comes to us from Haki na Sheria, which has also been an NGO which has been working with refugees in ensuring or trying to ensure that the challenges which Bisimwa is talking about are overcome. So put your hands together for, to welcome Sumaya, please.
Thank you, Prof. My name is Sumaya, as you've been told. I am from Haki na Sheria Initiative, which is a non-governmental organization based in Garissa. We work with, among other issues, refugee issues. And I think I'll just build on some of the issues that Bisimwa has actually highlighted. And in terms of the legal framework, there's always the question of, over 30 years ago, we accepted refugees into Kenya. It's been 30 years, what is the position? Are they still refugees? Are they Kenyans? What is it? So that's some of the issues I'd like to highlight. So in terms of attainment of citizenship in Kenya, there are about 5 ways in which you can attain citizenship, most of which we actually know. But I would like us to rethink it in the sense of refugees generally. So the main one which we actually know is citizenship by birth, and you've heard Bisimwa talking about children arising out of refugees and Kenyans. Are those children refugees? Are they Kenyans? Which one is it? And how have they been treated in the refugee camps once they're born? So the practice has been that children born in camps, and specifically I highlight the 3 camps in Dadaab. I know people like to say Dadaab camp, but there's no camp called Dadaab. It's the 3 camps in Dadaab, which is Ifo, Hagadera, and one with a very difficult name. So once the kids are born in the refugee camps, what essentially happens is there is no office of the Registrar of Births in the refugee camp. What we have is the UNHCR and the International Rescue Committee. So what you find is you're issued with a birth notification, which is immediately stamped with the stamp of the refugee agencies. And you find that from there henceforth, those kids are actually deemed to be refugees. So the treatment from the very first time they're born is that these are refugees. They've been labeled, and that's the narrative that the media has also been carrying forward. But you find that legally speaking, those kids are actually Kenyans. So you find that within our camps, what we tend to keep saying that, oh, we have this number of refugees. The question is, are they really, really refugees? So you're labeling Kenyans as refugees, and we're picking with that story and going with it. So that's the first category. The second is you find that we have host communities that live around the refugee camps. So there've been so much intermarriage between the host communities and the refugees. So you find that according to our constitution, there is citizenship by marriage, which is the second point I wanted to make. once you're married to a Kenyan for a period of 7 years, automatically you become a Kenyan as well. Of course, there's sort of application that needs to be done, and some legal hurdles which have also been put in place by Parliament, some of which are going to be, I'm going to highlight and how we've challenged that. So you find that in our camps, we have encamped our fellow Kenyans who have been married to Kenyans like us, who are technically and legally refugees. Kenyans, but we've called them refugees and we've gone with it. So that's the second category of people we tend to call refugees, but are actually Kenyans. The third category, which is the most damning of it actually, is that we attain citizenship by residence. Once you've lived in Kenya legally, by legal means, and you have a legal status for a period of 7 years, you become a Kenyan, just like the fellow Kenyans who are by birth or by marriage. So you find that since 1990, which is when around the same time that we opened the first refugee camp and allowed the refugees to come in, their legal status as refugees recognized both under the Kenyan law and as well as the international law. So you find that even if we keep saying that we have this number of refugees, if you think back, this is 30 years. This is way past 7 years. So what we are claiming to have refugees in Kenya, we actually have Kenyans calling them refugees, and we are encamping them, and we are continuing with the same trend. So there's so much hurdles that have been put in place for these guys to actually attain the documents to confirm their citizenship. Some of the work that we've done at Haki na Sheria, for example, we recently filed a petition about 3 weeks ago challenging the first category, which is the most vulnerable of them all, which are the children. You find that these kids' lives have essentially been, their destiny has been altered by the fact that you're born in the camp.
Even in some of the areas that we have worked with, our idea is basically to portray people who are coming in. If at all is a reason for safety, then it should be called as a reason. People are seeking a place for safety to protect their interests. But when we use such terms like economic migrants, to the effect that those who read may construe it to the effect that these are people who are coming in to take our opportunities and away from us. And sometimes also when writing about a country, some of the articles we've seen or some of the reports we've mentioned, people talk about defending borders from migrants or illegal migrants and all that. And that obviously sends a bad language. We have used also people called people who move with boats as boat people. They label them as boat people, obviously taking away. There's also this term known as expatriates. I mean, sometimes also it sends a very bad signal to those who read. So those are my few points for us. I hope I'll be able to answer any questions that comes thereafter. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Victor, on the language we used as media to portray refugees and how that may impact negatively about the perception that the population will have, and obviously the media portrayal of the same. Now, to wrap this up, I want to take 3 minutes to welcome Jean-Marie. Jean-Marie is my student. He has been in Kenya for 25 years. Parents came from Rwanda. He was born in Kenya. And his very short story is about how he has been around, and he's more Kenyan than some of us. And just a very short story in 3 minutes. Jean-Marie, please come. I have taught this young man from when he came to University of Nairobi. And he's a fine young man, but I discovered later that he's a refugee. He doesn't have the paperwork, but he's been here and he's a student. And he's just graduating next year from the University of Nairobi. So we'll just share a very short story about himself as a first-hand experience about what we are talking about. Jean.
Yes, thank you. Well, let me start by saying this was a bit ambushy. Not to put you on the spot, Prof, but I appreciate the chance to speak to this honorable congregation. My name is Jean-Marie Ishimwe. I have not planned any speech, so I'll speak from my experience. I think many of the colleagues have already mentioned about the fact that we speak on refugees, whereas themselves they can speak better on themselves. We all know the saying that whoever wears the shoes knows where it pinches most. So that's the same story of any refugee. We have different misconceptions of refugees, as most of the colleagues have mentioned, of them coming to steal the jobs of locals, or them being terrorists, or all those kind of stories. But really, that's not the case. I was born in Kenya 25 years ago, so I'm not very old. I know Kenya more than any other place. I feel more Kenyan than Rwandan, because my parents originally came from Rwanda. They left Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. Since then, they've not been able to go back because of protection issues. But then I find myself in this beautiful country called Kenya. I've gone to school with Kenyans. I have done a few things with Kenyans, maybe everything with Kenyans, because most of the people I interact with are Kenyans. But the continuous problem that steals and revolves me and many other refugees is the fact that we somewhat are excluded into how meaningfully we can be in the society. We are secluded into camps sometimes, and then there's not so much you can do in the camps when it's a small space and there's so many people there. Some of us who are in the urban setup like me have to go through a difficult journey of trying to access work even after qualifying. I know of a friend who we've been doing a lot of advocacy together, and he finished as an advocate of the High Court, as a lawyer, but he couldn't be admitted or given work in a law firm because of his status. Mainly the issues is documentation. So we have documents that don't give us a chance to better be included in the society. So I have a refugee ID that the KRA doesn't understand, or if they understand, there's a very bureaucratic and complex way of accessing, say, the KRA PIN, work permit, something very little as M-Pesa, which is something that most refugees use in their small businesses, but most of us don't have. And for those who have, who had gotten, they were closed down during the time when they were closing SIM cards. So I'd give a story in a long way, but because I think a lot of us are tired a bit and it's been a very good 3 days, I just want to say this, that many refugees in Kenya feel more that they want to contribute to Kenya. And the best way they want to contribute to Kenya is by giving the skills that we've gotten from here, the experiences we've gotten from here, and that will both include us socially, but also in an empowerment way, because everything that we're doing, me as a refugee advocate, is to see that the lives of refugees is changed. I went to a meeting in the IGAD, and the head of mission mentioned that if change is not happening in the community, it's not happening anywhere. And I think that's the very basic conversation we want to do, that for 30 years, for many years, refugees stay in the country, but they cannot contribute. They cannot progress. This is a story that someone mentioned here that could hit you, but it's how you have been able to be receptive to other people that they can be receptive to you. And that's what you'd be expecting. In this space, maybe let me lastly say that refugees have been contributing in many ways, basically through their skills. Myself, I'm currently a courtesy of Kenya Editors Guild. I'm a communication consultant. I'm studying at the University of Nairobi as a journalist. And I'm here to support their communication because they've allowed me a chance to support them. And that's the direction, allowing refugees to be able to contribute. Similarly, there are so many refugees who have refugee-led organizations that are registered as CBOs, supporting refugees and communities in Kenya. During COVID, we've seen that. Many organizations closed, but refugee organizations supported both Kenyans and refugees. So I would say so much. I do a lot of advocacy, but I'll just try and reinforce what my old colleagues are saying, that let's have a better way of reporting on refugees. Let's give them more voice. Let's not speak on them all the time. We have the platform. Most of us have big platforms here. Give us that chance so that we say the stories from our own perspective, and then we give the solutions we want, because we want to be meaningfully engaged. Thank you.
So thank you, Jean. Can we have a better clap for him? Thank you. So now we will go straight to any questions, clarifications on any one of those issues, from Daniel all the way to Sumaya. Any issues? We'll start from this direction. Okay, what we'll do, I will just pick all the questions. They will be writing down, and then they will answer after that round of questions. So we will start with you, madam. Yes, to our left. Where is the microphone? Okay.
My question goes to Sumaya. In regard to the refugee camps and access to the people who live there, I have really tried to do a story on women in refugee camps, and I have a reporter who has tried severally to even just get access to someone who could connect them to the camps, but it's very, very difficult. So it becomes a challenge to tell their stories. So I wish I would get to understand how to access these camps. Then to Victor, when you're giving us the terminologies or the language that we need to use when you're telling stories of refugees, you mentioned expatriates. And to me, as Dorcas, expatriate sounds posh, sounds elitist. So maybe you need to expound. Thank you.
My question also goes to Sumaya. A couple of years ago, there was a story in the news about how local communities around the camps, particularly Dadaab, how they somehow at some point, because of the economic situation around where they lived, they went into the camps and registered as refugees. So it got to a point where they needed to get out and they could not because they had registered as refugees. I don't know whether your organization dealt with this and how was that resolved, if it was resolved.
My question also goes to Sumaya. It's about the services to the refugees. You said that there are many options for them to regularize their stay in Kenya or get citizenship. But there seems to be a disconnect. As a civil society organization, how are you pushing this, and what is the major problem? Is it about legislation or a kind of reform that is needed? And to what level have you tried to push this?
Thank you very much, all the panelists, for those insights. I think it's the right time. I mean, you picked on the right forum to sensitize those who may not be aware. But of course, just like Doka said, I wanted to ask about accessing the refugee camps or the people in there for stories. But also maybe it's a comment then that I would add on that is that I think there's a lot of work that has been done. I know that the Ethical Journalism Network has done, come up with some books, some guidelines on reporting migration stories. And a lot of what you talked about and some of the research that you talked about has also been covered in those books, other than just that it covers, is more global, it's not just focused on Africa. And so I think there is need to get this information out and give us this lead so that we're able to get them. Of course, if you're listening from morning, resources are a challenge. The refugee camps, I mean, somebody needs to purpose to really go to those camps to cover those stories. But because there are human interest stories that would be interesting to, especially the media houses that would be keen to do stories, I think what we are lacking is the kind of information you're giving us, and that research that is on Professor Mugambi's shelves. I think, I don't know how we need to disseminate, but I think we need to get hold of them more. Thank you.
Three quick points. One, let Amnesty International plus any other agents that are involved in research share that information with the media. I mean, it's counterproductive. You do some of these good research recommendations, then you keep them to yourselves. So please share it out with the media. Two, understand how the media operates, particularly on language. The media, just like any other profession, we have our own language, and I'll be reluctant to, maybe to reload the media into reporting, or rather using the language that perhaps Amnesty International is comfortable with. So if you feel there is a gap within the language ecosystem, then it's only fair maybe you organize some forums in which you can sensitize the media. But otherwise, understand how the media operates. And lastly, about the Kituo cha Sheria, please go out there. Can you open up and organize some of these refugees to share their own personal stories? Thank you.
I think we take that round first, then there are only two. Okay, I think two is okay. We can go on with that.
Sorry. My name is Mary Mwendwa. My question is around the deregistration of refugees, especially the Kenyans who work in camps during drought, and when they come back, they are not able to access IDs. The government has been doing that exercise, and it has been very slow. And I understand many young people are not even able to go to the university or access other services because of this issue. How far has it gone, and what is Haki na Sheria? It's called Haki na Sheria doing? Asante.
Prof. We have all the questions.
Okay, I think most of the questions directed to Haki na Sheria, Sumaya, as well on the issue of access to refugees, especially in Dadaab. Victor on the issue of language, and the issue about guidelines and the reports to be shared by media. I think what I want to do, I want to start with Sumaya,
okay,
and then Victor, and Bisimwa. The other general questions, I think, in terms of closing remarks, Sumaya, I will want you to do this. You make your observations and also make them closing remarks so that we conclude on that matter as we proceed towards that direction.
Okay, thanks, Prof. So there were a bit about 3 questions, I think, that I'll address. The first one, there was a question about if the refugees are essentially entitled to citizenship, why is it so difficult for them to actually access these documents? So this problem is 2 parts. There are administrative hurdles and legislative hurdles, both of which I'll address as to what we are doing about it. So in terms of administrative hurdles, I had mentioned that that once a child is born in a refugee camp, they are issued with birth notifications and birth certificates that have stamps of refugee agencies, such as UNHCR and the International Refugee Committee. There's also a second thing that happens. These kids are actually entered into the refugee database. So there are no offices of the registrar of birth at the refugee camp itself. However, you'd find that so the question would be, how are birth certificates issued at the refugee camps if the office is not there? And this is where part of the bigger problem is. So there are services which are Kenyans services and to which Kenyans are entitled, for which refugees are receiving but Kenyans are not. You'd find that if you compare, and I think there's some research that has been done, perhaps you could share in the later, whereby you find that the issuance of birth notification in Garissa, the percentage is about 20 to 40%, whereas you find in Dadaab there's about 90% of issuance of birth certificates. So you find that there's no office, but services are being issued. And that the problem here is that the presence of agencies such as UNHCR and International Refugee Committee, essentially there is help to issue documents to refugees and not Kenyans. So if someone is a Kenyan and they're born at a refugee camp, they cannot leave the camp without a document, because you'd be asked who are you and where are you going. So you have to get the documents which to which refugees are entitled for you to be able to even leave the camp. And if you want to use that document to leave the camp, you cannot, because that's the same document which is essentially encamping you. So that's the first administrative hurdle, the lack of an office, a registrar's office at the camp, and the fact that the only service that's being rendered essentially in terms of issuance of birth notifications and certificates of birth are those kind of documents, or rather the two that have stamps, refugee stamps. So you cannot leave without a document, and the only document that you can procure is the same thing that will encamp you in the camps. So that's the administrative hurdle. In terms of the and that's how they are not able to, to be able to essentially get the documents to confirm their citizenship. And the second part, the other legislative hurdle in this case would be, for example, when I was talking about citizenship by way of marriage, for example. If you find that there's the legislation essentially explaining issues of citizenship, which is the Kenya Citizenship and Migration Act, has gone ahead and established a second criteria that the Constitution has not. These are issues which are susceptible to constitutional challenge. For example, if I am married to a Kenyan, and all I need to do is have 7 years to having established or maintain the marriage for a period of 7 years. When you go to apply, you're told no. In fact, you actually need to, one, be able to have stayed in Kenya for a period of 7 years, and secondly, also you need to show your entry stamp. How did you come into Kenya? So you see, refugees essentially don't come into Kenya using the normal channel. They come in as refugees. Some of them don't have documents because of the nature in which they fled their countries. So because of such administrative hurdles, you find that they're not able to be able to attain this status which legally they are supposed to, but they can't. So those are some of the issues. That's why one of the reasons why we went to court, because these hurdles which are being placed in the way to citizenship is what is causing them not to attain the citizenship. Not because legally they can't, but because factually speaking, on the ground things are sort of a bit different. You also find when you talk about citizenship by residence, so residence essentially is further again defined by the Act, the Kenya Citizenship and Migration Act, to mean two things: a permit or a pass. A refugee cannot have they can have a permit, which is a Class M permit, but essentially there's also a further problem whereby it's essentially very difficult to get that particular permit. And a dependence pass, for which one of the requirements for getting a dependence pass is you need to show lawful entry into Kenya, and what they accept essentially is your entry stamp from whichever port into Kenya, for which of course refugees don't have. So it's some of these small hurdles that are being placed on the way that are causing refugees to have a difficult time getting the citizenship. So essentially what needs to happen is that the state needs to recognize that lawful residence also includes the lawful state, the refugee status that international law and also national laws actually protect. So if we're able to, as Haki na Sharia, we are litigating around that area as well to try and get the courts to declare some of these provisions also to be unconstitutional, such as the failure to actually recognize the lawful stay by refugees, the refugee status, as a residency status in Kenya, as opposed to having to get a permit in addition to the refugee status. So there was also a question on what are we doing around the issue of the host communities who have been erroneously entered into the refugee database. And I'm glad there's about 2 questions about that particular issue, because we also filed a constitutional petition in Garissa in 2021 in terms of these communities who have been entered into the refugee database erroneously. Since our filing of the constitution, the government has issued about 14,000 IDs and have removed the names of these Kenyans from the database. These Kenyans who had initially gone to the refugee camps to get rationing and did not know, some of them who were even minors, did not know that their names were actually being entered into the refugee database. And we essentially, through the case that's currently pending in court, we're actually pushing for establishment of a procedure as to how removal can actually be done, maybe in terms of the timeline, the method, whether it's a letter or a form, so that it's clear next time that when someone, because there is a provision in the legislation that if someone, in the Refugee Act, that if someone is erroneously entered into the database, they need to be removed. But there's lack of procedural, the procedural manner in which to do that, and that's some of the issues which we are pushing for. There was a question on access, and I think I'll let Victor be able to answer that. Yeah. Okay. So as I finish up, thank you for your time on my part and on behalf of Haki na Sharia Initiative. And I'd say that, welcome and to the camp as well, and see how our fellow Kenyans are actually living as well, so that you're able to tell their stories. And also, as I said, demystify some of these misinformations which are being spread out, such as refugees causing insecurity and what have you. And then tell the story of Kenyans who are, Kenyans by law, but on the ground, something else is happening. And thank you.
Perhaps Somaya, Dorcas had asked a question. I'm not sure you have answered it. Did you?
She has passed to me.
Oh, okay.
Okay, good.
I think. But how many Kenyans had been entered into the refugee database? That is also important. How many were they generally? More than 14,000. Okay. All right. Victor?
Thank you. In terms of access to refugee camp, for us as NGO, what we do, we use fixers on the ground. We fund our travel to the camps, identify somebody or a fixer who understands the situation very well, who can be able to work with you in any location you are interested in. But just to share other ways of access that we that has always been used, there is through access with different NGOs that operates in the camp, but also around the camps, where you identify, you show your interest on a specific subject. If you are interested on GBV issues, there will be interest maybe to talk with IRC, which conducts a medical GBV center, especially in Hagadera refugee camp or Kakuma refugee camp. If you are interested on legal issues, obviously you'll be interested with Haki na Sharia, who will be able to work with you on areas of interest. Then also, there have also been interest to talk with the international organization, including UNHCR, but I know the difficulty of access to the camp with these particular organizations because of the policies they have, especially on supporting journalists to go through those processes. So you might need to relook into who you approach on that way. But I just want to inform you, there's actually a provision in the new refugee law that makes it an offense to enter the camp without authority of the camp manager. And you can be fined some thousands of shillings. And interestingly, for us, obviously, we are Kenyans. We should walk to any locations that we feel like we can walk. These are areas of interest that we will see how we'll be able to engage the government on this particular provision in the new refugee law that limits access to the refugee camp because they consider it a designated area. There was comments in terms of language, I really take them in, and obviously our interest basically is to share what works well for us, but also to share what works well for you, and we'll be able to take in some of the comments that were shared. In terms of just closing remark, thank you very much. We hope that we need to continue with this kind of interactive sessions, and hopefully Amnesty International will be able to support in different ways we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I would like to give to Dr. Mulo to perhaps a minute and pass on to Simon.
Thank you very much. Mine is just the closing remarks, and it's to just say that the media and the academia play a pivotal role in setting the agenda about our conversations with regard to refugees, and this, the way we define and label the refugees has a huge implication on how they are conceptualized, especially around policy circles. And we need to rethink some of the models that we've used when we're talking about refugees. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will briefly answer the question on information sharing research information with the media. So we are currently working on a dissemination strategy for this particular research, and we are privileged to have KEG as our partner, and obviously we'll have to share some of the research findings through KEG with the media. And we're also exploring further areas of research that are going to contribute to the work that we are doing. So briefly, that is it. We will be able to share that. And then lastly, I would like to thank everyone. It has been indeed a pleasure meeting you all, and especially sharing the research results. We hope to keep this interaction, and we'll be working with KEG to see what we can do. Thank you so much, and I'll hand over to...
Thank you very much. As my colleagues have said, I am glad that we've had this conversation. And I know it has opened many doors and avenues, because initially when we were, as journalists, I think we had reached a place where, like, when we found that it was almost impossible. And we've like almost exhausted all angles. But now it opens new doors, and we currently know, like for the Kenyan issue, we've heard about those issues of those undocumented Kenyans who are in the refugee camps, who are refugees in their own country. So, and also, yes, thank you. Going forward now, it's going to be easy. We know where to start. We know what are the stories. We know where to get the resources. So thank you, and we'll keep the fire burning. Thank you.
I think the story about the guys who sneak into the refugee camps and then can't get out is quite fascinating. We have the same problem in Uganda, where when donor agencies come in and give, for instance, relief food to the refugee communities, then their nutrition levels rise above the local communities. So they're better off than the locals. And I think it's one of those stories of moral hazard, unintended consequences. My final comment is, I think just as a journalist, our knowledge tends to be a mile wide and an inch deep. But I think if we're able to get into these fascinating stories, then it means we have a better understanding and a more nuanced understanding of what's going on around us, because I think these are communities that operate below our usual reporting bits. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think we've come to the end of this discussion on refugee issues. I think I want us to give a clap to this team before they step down. Can we clap for them? Thank you very much, Daniel, Eric, and the rest. So we can step down now. Thank you very much for being patient. I know time is not on our side. I want to hand over this to Rosalia for more guidance. For purposes of those who would require this research, which has been disseminated today, I can coordinate for you so that you can get this for your own purposes and of course for publication or use for our media. And I can also give you contact for not only for these organizations, but I know we deal with more on behalf of KEG, organizations which deal with refugee issues, and contacts who perhaps you can talk to, because we have those who are in the camps, but we also have those who are in urban areas like Mombasa, Mombasa, Nairobi, and other areas. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to say thank you very much for your participation in the Editors Annual Convention 2022. This is the final session, and thank you very much also to the panelists in this session for stellar contribution. And I hope we will write about refugee reintegration issues after this. So a few issues after this. Our tea, I hope you took tea, but if you didn't take tea, our tea is still there outside. Please grab yourself a cup. Then you're free to go freshen up. Then we have our final, the Editors Ball, which comes up at the beach. It will be held at the beach. Yeah, and there's going to be a band there, and I hope we're all looking forward to that. All right, so from 7:30 p.m., that's when the ball begins. So please grab your cup of tea and then grab your bag. Don't go without your bag. All delegates receive a gift for coming. That's a gift from Kenya Editors Guild. All right. And yeah, I think Sami is here. I can see. I don't know if he wants to tell us a little bit about what will happen there. So I think he can give us further details. But from me, thank you so much, guys. Let's give a round of applause for staying until the end. We always accuse our members of parliament for absconding parliamentary sessions. But now we have all the moral authority to write that there was a quorum hitch in particular session. So thank you very much and welcome to the ball. All right, Sami?
I know you guys have been here for a pretty long while today, so I don't want to say much. We will say more at the beach. I just want to say that as you grab your tea, remember we will have bitings down there. So they're arranging bitings for us before dinner. We will do everything at the beach. So from 7:30, they're already set up. Actually, I'm from there, and I've already sampled some of the cocktails. And I can assure you ziko sawa. Ziko sawa. So tupatane hiyo saa 1:30, but kutakuwa na bitings before dinner, so mtu asikule biting sana asahau kuna chakula. Sawa sawa, zitakuwa huko chini kwa beach. Everything is set up at the beach. Thank you. Yeah. People are asking about the dress code. Dress code ni vinyasa, nilisikia swimwear. Nilisikia hatuwezi sema bikini hapa itakuwa sexist. Kwamzi saying come without clothes, it's the beach. No, let's beach smart. For those of you who are trying to figure out what beach smart is, You can come with shorts, you can come for ladies just wear light dressing. Sandals tafadhali. Kwa sababu tunaenda kwa beach, tutakuwa kwa sun, just wear sandals. Thank you.